Welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at a deeply compelling piece of source material that really forces us to examine our fundamental assumptions about health, aging, and honestly, the ultimate authority of modern medicine. The central question we are exploring today is, well, it's essentially, what is the true secret to living long and maintaining cognitive clarity at 103? Or exploring the concept from our source material, Bi quit samta vomingmont atoy 100 and ba lazi. We are examining the testimony of Mabel Rose Thompson, a woman who is practically 104 years old. And she attributes her remarkable longevity, her pristine cognitive function, and her sheer physical resilience to a radical decision she made over 3 decades ago.
Mm-hmm.
She actively rejected mainstream medical advice for managing the chronic aging process, and instead she embraced an ancestral, intuitive approach to living, so prioritizing whole foods, natural movement, and strong social purpose. When I look at her story, I represent the view that I see profound empirical evidence here. This ancestral approach is indeed the optimal path for human longevity, and it really makes me wonder if the modern medical establishment consistently over-medicalizes the natural aging process.
It's definitely a story that makes you pause and reevaluate, especially when you see her current health markers. I'll be taking the opposing view today because while I am entirely on board with her holistic lifestyle practices, her dedication to whole foods, her sleep hygiene, her incredible community ties, I look at her overarching philosophy and see something fundamentally risky. Her total rejection of chronic medical management completely overlooks the reality of survivor bias.
Right.
Not to mention, she has some explicitly stated genetic advantages. So I think it's a dangerous leap to take an extraordinary sample size of exactly one person and use it to invalidate decades of population-level medical science.
I get why the sample size of one argument is the immediate reflex here. But let's sort of reframe what Mabel Thompson actually represents. She isn't just one anomaly. She is essentially representing a 10,000-year clinical trial of human evolution. Her approach is not some fringe alternative therapy. It is a return to our biological baseline. She relies on foods that human beings have consumed for millennia. I mean, we are talking beef, eggs, potatoes, raw milk from grass-fed cows. And the proof is in the pudding. She's 103, clear-minded, and physically resilient enough to survive a hard fall in her garden without a single fracture. You have to look at the shifting, often contradictory nature of medical dietary advice over the decades to see why outsourcing health judgment to institutions is flawed.
Right, but those are inputs going into a very specific, highly optimized biological machine. We cannot just separate her diet from her DNA. In her own testimony, Thompson explicitly notes that her grandmother lived to 94 and her mother lived to 91.
True, but as they say, genetics only load the gun, right? Environment and lifestyle pull the trigger.
Absolutely. But her genetic baseline points to a massive, undeniable advantage. Yes, her mother and grandmother lived long lives eating eggs and beef every day, but they also possessed a genetic architecture that allowed their bodies to process those inputs optimally. My concern, and what I really want to advocate for today, is that while questioning doctors is a healthy practice, tossing away prescribed medications entirely and viewing all chronic disease management as just some pharmaceutical opportunity designed to keep people sick, which is essentially her stance, is a really dangerous takeaway for the general public. Medicine operates on population-level statistics, whereas Thompson is, again, an extraordinary sample size of one.
Let's look at why she took that stance, though. She didn't just wake up one day and decide to hate medicine. When we look at the validity of modern medical guidelines versus these intuitive, real food diets, she uses her own life as evidence to highlight the failures of 20th century dietary dogmas. She has eaten a pound of beef almost every single day since 1963. She uses coarse earth salt generously, yet at 103, her blood pressure is a perfect 118/74, and she is entirely cancer-free.
Wow, yeah.
She makes this brilliant observation about a granola bar invented in 1978. It has 47 artificial ingredients. Her argument is that the 47-ingredient granola bar makes us the untested experiment, not her steak. The medical establishment spent the 60s and 70s demonizing fat and salt while promoting carbohydrates and processed vegetable oils. She ignored them, and she's thriving.
I will definitely concede that historical dietary guidelines were deeply flawed. We know now they were heavily influenced by industry lobbying, and whole foods are vastly superior to ultra-processed convenience foods. I am totally with you on the granola bar point. Nobody thinks 47 artificial ingredients is ideal for human biology. But we have to be really careful about dismissing objective medical metrics just because her specific body handles them well. I push back firmly on the idea that high cholesterol or elevated blood pressure are merely numbers on a piece of paper.
But for her, they were.
For her, yes. Just because Thompson's specific physiology processes a high-sodium, high dietary cholesterol intake without adverse vascular events does not mean those metrics are fabricated risk factors for everyone else. Hypertension is a mechanical reality. It is a silent killer that damages the endothelial lining, which is, the delicate inner lining of our blood vessels, over decades. That damage is an objective mechanical reality of the human cardiovascular system, not some medical conspiracy.
But doesn't her perfect blood pressure at 103 suggest that the salt wasn't the enemy? That perhaps the refined sugars and lack of movement in the broader population were causing the hypertension all along, while salt just took the blame?
It suggests her body processes sodium efficiently, but discarding the utility of medical screening because one genetically gifted centenarian outlived her doctors is textbook survivorship bias. For every Mabel Thompson who can safely ignore a high cholesterol reading, there are thousands of individuals for whom that same reading is a direct precursor to a fatal myocardial infarction. When her cardiologist stared at her chart in disbelief, it was because she is a statistical anomaly, not because the fundamental mechanics of cardiology are a myth.
Well, she didn't just outlive one doctor, though. She buried 7 of them. 7 highly credentialed men who told her she would die if she didn't adhere to their specific pharmaceutical interventions. And this brings us to a really crucial point of contention here: the role of pharmaceutical intervention in aging versus actual quality of life. Let's go back to that experience with Dr. Greer when she was 71.
The statin prescription.
Right. He puts her on statins based purely on a chart, completely ignoring her family history of longevity and her actual physical vitality. The immediate result was that she suffered severe muscle aches and absolute brain fog. Her legs felt like she was running through mud. So she threw the bottle in the trash. Thompson makes a profoundly scientifically accurate observation here. The human brain is roughly 60% fat and runs on cholesterol.
Which is true. Cholesterol is a vital structural component of human cells.
Exactly. So by aggressively trying to fix a single numerical marker to satisfy a generalized medical guideline, the medicine directly interfered with her body's fundamental biological processes. It actively deteriorated her quality of life. She viewed that chronic medication like putting a piece of tape over a car's check engine light. You aren't fixing the engine, you're just hiding the signal.
I completely validate her specific adverse reaction to those statins. What she experienced, statin-induced myopathy, the severe muscle damage, and cognitive effects, those are absolutely documented side effects for a subset of patients. Dr. Greer should have listened to her immediately. That is an example of poor clinical practice, not necessarily a failure of the medication itself. But respectfully, medicine is not purely a villain in Thompson's story, and to her credit, she actually admits this herself. We cannot ignore the fact that she explicitly notes acute medicine saved her daughter's life from a ruptured appendix back in 1954.
She does mention that, yes.
Without that surgical intervention, her daughter would have died. The generations of grandchildren and great-grandchildren that currently bring Thompson so much joy and purpose simply would never have existed. Medicine is extraordinary at crisis intervention. Where her philosophy falters, in my view, is in drawing this hard, impenetrable line between acute care and chronic management. She casts all preventative chronic medicine as a systemic attempt to keep you sick and dependent. While statins were clearly the wrong choice for her, lipid-lowering therapies have objectively prevented millions of secondary cardiovascular events globally. To frame the entirety of chronic disease management as a pharmaceutical trap is an overreach.
I think the line she draws between acute trauma care and the chronic management of natural human aging is actually quite precise.
She isn't dismissing the value of an emergency room for a ruptured appendix. She is critiquing the medicalization of the aging process itself. And that agency, taking control back from the clinic, is what leads us to the true mechanisms of our longevity. It isn't just about what she avoids, it's about what she actively does, her lifestyle, her movement, and her profound sense of purpose.
Absolutely.
Thompson's daily routine is a masterclass in circadian and evolutionary biology. She sleeps with the sun, completely rejecting artificial blue light. She eloquently states that sleep is medicine, not laziness. She moves naturally by gardening and walking on uneven ground, and perhaps most importantly, she maintains fierce, non-negotiable social ties. She has weekly calls with her great-granddaughter Celeste. She does regular porch visits with her 79-year-old neighbor Herb. As she so beautifully puts it, purpose is the longest-lived nutrient.
And modern science completely supports her approach there. We know that circadian-aligned sleep is paramount for neuroprotection. It facilitates glymphatic clearance, the brain's overnight plumbing system. Her functional, varied movement on uneven terrain preserves proprioception, which protects bone density far better than engineered gym routines. And the data on social isolation backs her up completely. Loneliness is statistically as dangerous to long-term health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We find very strong agreement on this point.
So if we agree on the power of these interventions, why the hesitation on her broader philosophy?
Because the crux of the debate pivots on whether these lifestyle factors completely replace the need for medical screening, or whether they simply complement it. Thompson advocates for outsourcing judgment entirely back to one's own intuition, claiming the body will tell you when something is wrong. In the instance of the statins, yes, it did, but many chronic diseases do not broadcast warning signs. Early-stage cardiovascular disease, certain oncological developments, osteopenia, these are entirely asymptomatic until a catastrophic event occurs. You cannot always feel a calcified artery. You cannot intuitive your way out of an early-stage malignancy. That is why we screen.
But her argument is that the body, backed by 3.5 billion years of evolutionary intelligence, actually is constantly communicating. Through our energy levels, our digestion, our mood. The problem is that when people suppress those subtle signals with processed foods and polypharmacy, they lose the ability to hear what their body is telling them. Thompson hasn't just survived, she has thrived in a way that confounds her current, highly capable physician, Dr. Vasquez. When he looks at her perfectly healed hip and perfect cognitive scores, he has the intellectual humility to simply say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
He does.
Her 103 years of life stand as a testament to the profound intelligence of the human system. By trusting evolutionary history over ever-changing medical trends, and by eating food our ancestors would recognize, we really can achieve true longevity and clarity.
It is an incredibly inspiring story, but we must balance it with clinical reality. Dr. Vasquez's response is the perfect example of good medicine, observing an exceptional outcome and not interfering. I don't dispute that Thompson's dedication to community, natural sleep, and whole foods provides an absolute blueprint for healthy aging, but we cannot strip away the context of her exceptional genetic luck, nor can we ignore the statistical, life-saving power of modern preventive medicine for the broader population. Her advice to ask doctors why is fantastic, but universally dismissing preventive care based on her unique survival story carries immense risk for those without her specific biological resilience.
Well, it certainly forces a really necessary reevaluation of how our society manages aging. Mabel Thompson's journey challenges the default assumption that cognitive decline and frailty are just inevitable, and it asks us to seriously consider the compounding value of ancestral diets and profound social connection.
It certainly does. We might disagree on the universal applicability of her rejection of chronic medicine, but we can definitely agree on the value of intellectual humility, which Dr. Vasquez elegantly demonstrated. The challenge for listeners is to explore what listening to their own body means for them, balancing empirical science with the undeniable power of holistic health practices.
There is clearly much more to explore in this material and in the broader conversation about human longevity and cognitive clarity. Thank you for joining us for this rigorous exchange of ideas.